People have different kinds of days. Some are good, others are worse. But these events did not belong to the modern world. They came from a time when courts decided life or death. There was no room for mistakes. A cold corridor, shackles around his wrists, guards leading him forward, ahead, execution. This was no reversible process, it was fate. His tragic and irreversible fate. The man who ordered the execution, the one who stood nearby without taking part directly, simply glanced at his watch. So this was it. There were people here who destroyed lives without a single drop of compassion. The watch caught the sunlight, and the man covered it. Covered it because the fatal minute of someone's end had arrived, had finally caught up. And now his head was positioned beneath the blade. The man who had been counting the minutes to the execution declared that the guilty one, the great emperor, had fallen victim to the devil's claws, drugs. Of course, the condemned man wanted the right to speak. It was slander. It wasn't true. They had to forgive him. They had to remain human. But the one who had been counting continued the sentence, stating that breaking the law was punishable by death. No one counted anything, and no second chances were given. To them, it was entertainment. Someone else's death, of course. They clung to their own lives as best they could, praying that such a fate would never reach them. The rope was released, the blade fulfilled its single purpose, and the people, like it was a parade or a concert, screamed and rejoiced. Only one girl did not give in to this false joy. To her, it did not feel like entertainment, but like a terrifying blow of fate that could strike anyone. What they had killed before them was not a simple peasant or someone insignificant. It was an emperor. And she had a secret that intensified her fear of the same fate more than the public execution itself. It could kill her even without a blade. So the girl decided it was better to leave that place. She took no pleasure in what she had witnessed, even though she knew that anyone who broke the law was supposed to be punished. As she pushed through the crowd, people spoke about how the executed man had actually been lucky. It was good it had been done before the Archduke arrived, because he surely would have punished not the culprit, but his entire family. Rumors spread that in this war, with a single strike, he had taken the life of King Kalpins himself. This frightened people, since such powerful figures usually kept other monarchs alive at least for negotiations, but he hadn't. They gossiped that the Archduke must have lost his mind. Completely gone mad, that was all. People said that since the war was over, the Archduke would soon return. Those words knocked the basket of herbs from the girl's hands. They immediately noticed the girl. All of them. Everyone on the square, because they all knew her. People began asking one another whether their eyes had deceived them, whether this was the same famous healer who lived on the neighboring street. One man shouted that thanks to her, his arm no longer hurt. The medicine she had made had saved him. And a woman with a child thanked her for the remedy that had saved her child from a fever. And she, hurrying away, thought that it was worth it, what she was doing, even if the outcome turned out to be the same as the emperor's. She assured herself that she simply had to manage, that everything would work out. Everything she did, no matter how it looked, was all for helping His Majesty. Only for that reason. She believed her work was beneficial to him and knew she had to try very hard to help. When she reached her refuge, the girl decided that her research had to be conducted as quickly as possible before she was exposed. Entering her home, she was still somewhat frightened, since her work was dangerous. By the way, the healer was beautiful. Unique hair, very light, green-tinted eyes, pale skin, full lips. The house she entered was far too quiet. That was unsettling, especially after what had happened. The fear of death would likely haunt her for a long time. Apparently, everyone had gone to watch the execution, as if it were a circus or a concert. Because the building felt so empty, she grew uncomfortable. Out of place, as if gripped by some ominous premonition. She just wanted to get inside as soon as possible, at least there to breathe out and feel that she was okay. But her hand froze, never touching the doorknob as sudden thoughts overtook her. Fear seized her mind once again. Could someone have broken in? Unlikely. When she pulled the door toward herself, she felt it was locked. And that, of course, brought relief. She was simply overthinking. Nothing more. There was no reason to worry. The beautiful healer stepped into the room. In her mind, she had already calmed herself. If the door had been locked, then no one could have been inside. That should have been the case, but unfortunately, she was wrong. Someone was waiting for her. A handsome man was sitting by the window, examining some of the tinctures she had prepared. She addressed him as His Grace, startled that someone was there. His name was Cesare Karl Erzeth, the very Archduke. He addressed her by name as well, Eileen Elrod. The girl couldn't hide her surprise and asked what he was doing here. But the question immediately shifted. When had he even managed to return? The man smiled. He asked whether that was all she intended to say to him. The girl immediately bowed and said she also wished to congratulate him on his victory. She said she had planned to congratulate him later when the opportunity arose, but the Archduke interrupted her, saying that he knew she had done many terrible things while he was away. Eileen smiled and raised her head, asking what exactly he meant, as if she hadn't done anything of the sort. But the man replied that he knew that during his absence, the healer had been preparing forbidden substances. He said he even knew the exact name: opium. The girl wanted to explain something, but he continued. She stopped the moment he gave her that threatening look. The room seemed to grow colder. The man said that she knew perfectly well that excuses like, "I was making painkillers," would not work. In this empire, any interaction with forbidden substances was illegal. Therefore, he had the right to execute her immediately. First, the basket of herbs slipped from her hands. Then she herself sank to the floor. The man listened as Eileen addressed him in a trembling voice. The fear of death had so completely taken over her mind and body that she could no longer speak clearly. In a barely audible whisper, she said only that she wanted to help him. That help, she explained, could have been a great benefit to the soldiers. The girl, already crying, explained that she understood and knew opium and any other narcotic substances were forbidden, but still, it had never been meant to cause harm. Then the Archduke leaned down to her, placed a hand against her cheek, and said that he truly understood everything. He had changed. He smiled at the girl warmly and said that he had never actually meant to frighten her. He lifted his other hand and cupped her face as well, asking her to simply listen for now. He took her glasses from her and said that at this moment, what he needed was an archduchess. Putting her glasses on himself, the man asked how she would feel about marrying him. The girl stared at the handsome man in front of her. Unable to believe that he was truly proposing, she blushed deeply, hardly believing what she had heard. It almost felt like a hallucination, as if she had imagined it or misheard, so unreal it seemed. If one were to consider it a joke, that seemed unlikely. He hardly appeared capable of joking like that. He was far too serious. Yet there was something she didn't understand, something she truly couldn't grasp, and so she hesitated. The man had expected her to agree immediately, if only to survive. He smiled, knowing how utterly unreal his words must have sounded. An image flashed through his mind of a girl who would accept at once, praying only to be spared. But no, it was the complete opposite. The girl refused. She said plainly that she did not want to marry him. That turn of events surprised him slightly, though he didn't show it. He pretended to ponder her answer. He placed a hand on her head and asked whether she was choosing the guillotine over marrying him and living. She replied that she hadn't meant it that way, so the man asked why she was refusing. After all, her choices were either to lose her head or to be sold off to some filthy pig. She asked why he had said pig, but the man asked her not to make him repeat those words. The girl said that she didn't believe he would love her, and that he was only taking care of her because her mother had once been his wet nurse. After saying that, the girl blushed and bit her lip, suddenly embarrassed. She was certain and said so aloud that he still saw her as nothing more than a child. And besides, he needed a child himself. An heir. She even lowered her gaze as she said that they would have to do improper things to conceive a child, and that he wouldn't be able to. What exactly? She never managed to finish saying. She didn't finish because the man didn't let her. He placed his hand on her cheek again and leaned in for a kiss. And then, to her surprise, his lips pressed against hers. The girl didn't push him away, even though she hadn't really wanted intimacy with this man. She even trembled, her hand clenching into a fist. Yes, it was pleasant. Kissing was pleasant. In the end, he even gently bit her lower lip. Then he pulled away, allowing her to breathe. Holding her by the head, the man asked how that had been for her. He asked whether she finally believed his words now, fixing her with that same threatening look. A man named Rothan, the Knight of Tesserae, asked whether the girl was all right, as his grace had ordered that the girl be brought to the residence. She was still holding her lip, red as a tomato, unable to believe what had happened, which naturally raised questions about her strange state. The girl turned to the knight and explained that the Archduke had proposed to her. The knight replied, "Oh, I see." And she couldn't believe that was truly his entire response, so brief, as if it were exactly how things were supposed to be. The girl asked why he wasn't surprised, and the knight answered that it was obvious, because under any other scenario, she would have been sentenced to death. He gave her some candy and said that the Empire was fighting opium more fiercely with each passing day. It was a serious battle. His grace had been searching for a way out and had found it in making the girl an archduchess, because that was what he needed overall. Yes, indeed, it was an effective solution. As for her history, her mother truly had been the Archduke's wet nurse, which was why her family was considered loyal to him. If Eileen were executed now for a crime involving narcotics, it would leave a significant stain on the man's reputation. But if this proposal was based solely on advantage, then any other girl could have taken her place. A marriage without love was not what she had dreamed of. The knight said that, one way or another, she had no choice. But he asked why she had done it at all, why she had gotten involved with forbidden substances. The girl told the truth. She had only wanted to be useful to his grace. After all, ever since childhood, she had received help from him, and strong painkillers were desperately needed during the war. The girl was surprised. How had they even found out that she possessed opium? The knight said it would have been strange if they hadn't noticed her purchasing opium. He had actually assumed she was buying it for herself, or that someone had tried to deceive her, or something else entirely. In any case, he said, the Archduke was doing this for her, though it might be a heavy burden for her to bear. She adjusted her glasses and said that she needed time, at least a little, to think. She added that she meant it seriously, that the knight should at least think about her father, who would surely cause the Archduke no small amount of trouble. She said there was no need to explain further. They knew perfectly well what kind of man he was. But the knight was suddenly different, colder, more threatening. Something in him had shifted so subtly it wasn't immediately visible. She called out to him, and the knight responded at once, lively and normal again. He said that everyone else was eager to finally see her, because when they heard he would be visiting her today, they had asked him to pass along their greetings. The girl immediately brightened and asked whether everything was all right with them. She knew all of them by name, so she asked about each one. The knight replied that everyone was fine, and added that Diego had brought them a stuffed rabbit as a gift. Meanwhile, evening was already falling. The man stood in his study looking through a notebook. He read the healer's notes and smiled. Then his expression darkened again. He frowned and muttered to himself that, so far, everything was going exactly according to plan. Glancing at his watch, he said he was doing this for someone, though it was unclear whom he meant. As for how the girl and the Archduke had met, it was simple. When she was little, she had gotten lost. She walked around crying, searching for her mother. Someone crossed her path and asked whether she was the nanny's daughter. Lily. The man, refined aristocratic, asked whether Lily was her nickname or perhaps her real name. Through sobs, the girl said it wasn't her full name. Her mother called her that, the same mother she had just lost. At the mere mention of her mother, the girl burst into even harder tears, terrified because she couldn't find her anywhere. Unable to hold back, she suddenly jumped forward, nearly crashing straight into the guy's arms, so abruptly that he even stepped back. The guards beside him were about to step in, already moving, but the guy stopped them with a wave of his hand. The little girl cried into his chest, saying she wanted her mom. She begged him not to go anywhere, to wait, her words frightening in their simplicity. He was a stranger, after all, yet she had thrown herself into his arms, sobbing. Eileen continued, explaining that she had gotten distracted by a beautiful flower and hadn't listened to her mother. The man smiled and said the girl was lucky. Her mother was waiting for her too, and searching for her. That calmed the girl a little, that the guy knew her mother, that she was also looking for her. Smiling gently, the guy lifted the girl into his arms and asked whether she was ready to go with him to find her mommy. That was the moment she now remembered, the grown woman recalling how it had once been when she first encountered the Archduke. She had rushed into his arms without thinking, and back then, His Grace had only been a very young prince. Looking back, she decided that perhaps it would have been better to run to Sir Rothan instead. Maybe her fate would have turned out differently. She also remembered her mother's words from that day, her guidance to her daughter. As her mother placed glasses on her little daughter, Eileen, she asked her to listen carefully. The woman said that no matter what happened, Eileen Allord must never disgrace the prince because their family existed to serve His Grace until their final breath. Her mother commanded her never to forget that, and now the girl admitted that she truly couldn't. That was the answer to her doubts. He was the Archduke of the prosperous Erzeth and the great High Commander. In the struggle for the throne, he had personally placed his only brother upon it. A truly noble and great Archduke. Not just by title, he was a great man, one who left people breathless in his presence. But how could an ordinary girl, a simple nobody, become his Archduchess? If only her mother were alive, she wouldn't have let this go unnoticed. Even the thought of becoming the wife of such a great man felt wrong, as if it would leave a dark stain on His Grace's honor. She braced her hands on the table and stood up sharply, thinking that there had to be another way. She felt an urgent need to find a solution, to avoid execution without entering this marriage. But finding such a way on her own seemed far too difficult. Outside, it was already growing late and dark. And if she thought about it, had her father still not returned? A week passed after the girl decided to leave, though she still didn't know where. Even a few girls sitting nearby took notice of her. She was dressed rather uniquely, in a boy's disguise to be precise, so they even asked whether such a handsome young man would like to spend some time with them. Her father hadn't been home for an entire week, she thought, so she was sure he had to be somewhere nearby. And as for money and gambling, she recalled how she had been told that the Archduke was returning to the capital, and that construction of a triumphal arch had even been approved. Her father had said it was a miracle, that he was unbelievably lucky because he could hit the jackpot. The man had jumped up and said he had to leave. The girl wanted to ask what he planned to do but didn't get the chance. He was already gone. She was certain he had gone straight to the Archduke, and if he had taken money from him, then he must have offered something in return. And she had to retrieve whatever remained and return at least that much. She couldn't possibly cause His Grace even more trouble. But the girl was careless as she walked and didn't notice two men appearing behind her, yanking off her cap and freeing her hair from its confinement. She turned to ask what they wanted and what they were doing, while the men talked among themselves, saying they had noticed long ago that something was off about this boy. And now here was the answer. It was a girl. They asked what was wrong with her appearance. So gloomy, such an awkward fringe. It was amazing, they said, that his friend had managed to see a girl in her at all. They began moving straight toward her, saying that she, a sweet little girl, must have come here for them, making lewd remarks about her body, even though they had first called her ugly. But someone appeared who didn't let her fall, grabbing her by the shoulders from behind. Eileen was utterly shocked, and someone began saying that now he understood where that stench was coming from. The girl realized the voice was behind her, so she turned around to look. There stood a red-haired man, threatening, massive, dangerous, who said the stench was coming from a pack of idiots. The moment they saw him, all three froze in fear like startled rabbits and began backing away, already sensing they were in serious trouble. The man seemed to growl like a wild animal, saying they were unlucky to have fallen into his hands, because he showed no mercy to those who harassed women. The girl he had stepped in to protect suddenly called him by name. It was Sir Diego, the very man mentioned earlier. When he saw her, the man went completely still. He hadn't expected to see her here. Eileen. No, more than surprised, he was frightened the instant he recognized her. This man was another of the Archduke's knights. The perverts took advantage of the moment while the big man was distracted and bolted, both of them fleeing as fast as they could. Diego led her to a safer place and said he didn't understand what she was doing here. Alone, in such a dangerous area, at such a late hour, something truly could have happened to her. He ordered them beer and asked her to calm down, to catch her breath. He promised that those vile men would be punished. The girl turned to Diego and asked what he himself was doing in a place like this. After all, it wasn't exactly a respectable establishment, women, alcohol, and all that. As if analyzing the question, he awkwardly pointed at himself, clearly caught off guard by what she had asked. He grew nervous and said that if Miss Eileen had thought something improper, it wasn't like that at all. He was here on duty. She gestured toward the performer behind them, a girl with her chest exposed halfway, and asked how he could possibly be on duty in a place like this. Diego muttered under his breath that no matter what he said, it would sound strange. What a disgrace. Eileen asked him what he'd just muttered. She had heard it despite his mumbling, so the man apologized, saying it had just slipped out. The girl said that something else mattered more. She had a question. She asked whether he had happened to see her father. He hadn't been home for a whole week, and she thought he might be somewhere in this district, so she had stopped by to check. But Diego changed the subject, saying that in his opinion, the girl needed to drink something. He started offering hot chocolate or warm milk with honey. That was when the girl realized he was deliberately hiding something. Eileen pulled the mug that was already in front of her closer and told him not to fuss. This would do. Diego was about to say that the mug contained beer, but it was too late. She hadn't heard him and downed it almost in one gulp. He commented that their lady, Eileen, had truly grown up, now even drinking alcohol. She had acted on impulse and after drinking, turned to the man, saying she really did have a question for him. Flushed from the sudden rush of alcohol, she asked again where her father was. Eileen said he was definitely hiding something and there had to be a reason Diego was doing it, so she asked him to tell the truth. As he bit his lip, unsure what to do, he spotted salvation behind the girl. The Archduke, who had suddenly appeared behind her, said that Diego couldn't tell her. The girl turned to the man, and he explained with a smile that if she was going to be angry, it shouldn't be with the knight. but with him. He soon arranged for fresh cookies to be brought, apologizing that he couldn't offer her tea at the moment. She was already bright red. He had chosen the worst possible moment to appear, when she looked far from her best. She had turned toward him slightly drunk, with disheveled hair sticking out in every direction. The girl decided he must think she looked pathetic. It was hard to even hold his gaze. Sudden embarrassment washed over her. He once again took on that threatening look, and the girl immediately addressed his grace, trying to explain something. She had just begun to speak, but the moment she looked up at him, she faltered. What was with him all of a sudden? But that expression quickly vanished from his face, and he instantly dispelled the ominous mood with a smile. Since she was talking more than eating, he reached for a cookie, took one, and pushed it gently into her mouth, telling her to eat. Eileen began chewing, thinking about how suddenly he had changed, how threatening he had looked just moments before. She barely noticed the cookie. The intensity of his gaze had cut straight into her, almost unnaturally so. He even reached toward her lips to wipe away the crumbs, but then she snapped back to herself and said she could handle it on her own. The Archduke smiled at her and said that she didn't need to be quite so serious. He said he would never harm her in any way, so she could be completely at ease. Of course, she hadn't thought he would hurt her. The look had simply been strange, and his actions had made her flustered. Deciding to surprise her even more, the man said that the most he would ever do to her was kiss her. She was so startled by that. He suddenly took her face in both hands, and then she remembered that he had decided to marry her. She pulled away and lowered her head. The girl asked whether he truly intended to marry someone like her. No, literally her. He said he didn't understand why she doubted it. He was even ready to prove it. But the girl objected, saying that before he went to the front, he had behaved differently. She knew that many things had truly changed, but why had the greatest change appeared in him? The man answered that 7 years had been more than enough to change him, among other things. The girl was surprised to hear that. She even reminded him that the war had lasted only 3 years, not 7. He didn't answer. He simply stared at her so intently that she eventually turned away, blushing. She replied that this wasn't the point and asked whether there was any other solution besides marriage. At the very least, she needed time to give an answer. He didn't seem to understand that the morphine she had developed wasn't just an ordinary painkiller. It was far more versatile. The real question was whether the man was listening at all, because instead of replying, he leaned his forehead against hers, completely off topic. Then he asked whether she simply hadn't liked kissing him. You know how it feels when you're trying to explain something important, something that could save an entire army, and the conversation suddenly gets twisted in a completely different direction, leaving you speechless. And on top of that, it's the Archduke himself asking, a man of absolutely unreal looks. Could she really not have liked it? Especially when he was her secret love, the man she had dreamed about for many, many years. She had dreamed of touching his lips with hers at least once in her life. It appeared in her sweetest dreams, and yet she couldn't tell the truth, that she had liked it, that she had been in love with him for years. In fact, everything she had done, the invention of that medicine, her refusal to marry, it all had meaning. It had meaning because she hadn't done any of it randomly. She had done it out of love. She loved him with all her heart and wanted to be useful. A confession, though. A confession would only be a burden. He didn't need it. If she had been of noble birth, or perhaps richer, more beautiful, maybe then she would have let her feelings loose. But she was a commoner. So, after thinking it all through, the girl said yes. The kiss hadn't pleased her at all. It had been unpleasant. The man placed his hand on her chin and gently lifted her head, reminding her that he had already told her not to close her eyes when she lied. Eileen pushed him away and said she wasn't lying. It had just been her first kiss. That was why she was embarrassed and not used to it. That only made him laugh because he knew her well enough to be certain she was lying. Teasing her, the man said that if she wasn't used to it, then they would keep doing it until she was. The girl turned bright red and immediately covered her mouth with her hands, saying that was absolutely not allowed. She almost squeaked that she had just eaten cookies and before that drunk beer, so there was no way he should try to kiss her. He had no intention of listening, already reaching for her, turning her face back toward his. When she resisted, the man began kissing her neck, and goosebumps raced across her skin from his touch. He didn't stop, and the girl began pleading softly for him to stop, saying she already felt very strange. And how could she possibly push someone like that away? He was heavy, for one, and kisses from the person you love are far too pleasant to allow clear thinking. The moment he reached for Eileen's waist, the girl cried out loudly, demanding that he stop and not do something foolish. She pressed lightly against his chest, trying to push him away. Then the man placed his hand over hers. Cesare said that the next day he would like to invite the girl to the palace. He gently kissed the beauty's hand before continuing. Then he explained, there would be a banquet in honor of the victory. He wanted her to come, to him, and offer her congratulations personally. Holding her hand in his, he said that he truly hoped she would come. He would be waiting. Later, Diego escorted the girl home and, watching the carriage depart, muttered that it was unfair that out of all possible places they had met here. This job should have been Rothan's, not his. He had known Eileen for a long time after all, and running into her in such an indecent place was awkward. Still, he decided not to dwell on it. When he returned to the Archduke, Diego intended to inform him that Lady Eileen had safely gone home. He had made sure of it. He didn't get the chance to finish, interrupted by a voice from below calling his name and begging for help. It seemed to be Eileen's father, the very man she had been searching for so desperately. He was clutching Diego's leg and pleading for mercy. He said that dear Eileen was probably looking for her father. Still gripping Sir Diego's leg, he asked why he had been locked up in such a horrifying place at all. And judging by the surroundings, many lives had been consumed there. The knight had no right to act on his own, and besides, the Archduke, who was also present, addressed him. Smiling with satisfaction and wiping blood from his face, he told Diego that he was never to pour beer for Eileen again. Hearing the man's voice, the blonde man was truly terrified, and clearly for good reason, considering where he was now. Cesare told Diego to hide all alcohol from her, anything she might come across, and the knight nodded. Smiling, the man leaned toward the Baron and yanked his head closer by the hair, asking whether he had anything left to sell. Diego only watched as the Baron begged to be released, swearing he had never intended of selling Eileen. But the Archduke had no intention of stopping. He even said they hadn't begun yet, and the Baron was already terrified to death. Diego noticed that his lord truly seemed to be in a good mood, despite the horrifying scene. Something had indeed changed in him. Memories surfaced of 6 months earlier, when they had conquered the kingdom of Kalpin. Its king had even accepted defeat himself. The crowned man had declared that the kingdom of Kalpin was now officially a vassal of the victorious empire. Sir Rothan and Diego had been there as well. And it was then that the Archduke suddenly said that 7 years had already passed. Then the man smiled, and there was something about it. Something threatening, an aura so terrifying it seemed to radiate outward from him. Cesare was breathing heavily, and the king kneeling before him didn't know where to direct his gaze. The man terrified him, and for good reason. The Archduke intended to take not only his kingdom, but his life, raising his sword to the king's neck. Of course, the old man began begging for mercy. He said he had already bowed his head, admitted defeat, his kingdom had become a vassal. But it didn't help. Soon enough, he was left without his head. Cesare showed no mercy and listened to nothing. As they were leaving, Sir Rothan said that if the Archduke had spared the king, he might still have been useful. There had to be a reason he had taken his life so suddenly. But he gave no answer, only shocked them both by saying that he intended to marry Eileen as soon as they returned. Rothan asked whether that might be too much for Lady Eileen, but the Archduke replied that it didn't matter. Better this than her head ending up beneath a guillotine. As he strode ahead, he heard a question thrown after him. Who would even dare to do such a thing to her? The Archduke didn't answer that either. He only said there was something else, something more important. Watching the birds in the sky, he added quietly that he would not allow it to happen a second time. That was why he was so ruthless now. Or rather, he understood his actions, while everyone else simply noticed the change. The next day, Eileen went out to the square with everyone else to watch the victors pass by the common people. There were so many people gathered that there was hardly room to move. She had to push her way forward. Her small stature wouldn't have allowed her to see anything from afar. She managed to secure a good spot, and now she could see everything. Ahead of the Archduke marched ranks of knights, warriors, and countless others. Off to the side, other men played triumphant songs, and the crowd sang along, cheering loudly. The girl was swept up in the spectacle as well, sincerely rejoicing, for the Archduke and for all the warriors who had returned alive, victorious. The loudest cheers erupted when the Archduke himself rode through the crowd. People threw flowers at him, congratulated him, shouted his name. Cesare looked truly powerful. Dressed in lavish robes adorned with countless precious ornaments, the man radiated strength and authority. Yet among the thousands gathered there, the only person his gaze found was Eileen. To him, she stood apart from everyone else. She too was thinking of him, of how dazzling he was. At the same time, Cesare leaned down to accept a flower from the hands of a small girl who offered it to him. That child, who had only a single flower instead of the massive bouquets others carried, would surely remember that moment forever. And in that instant, he seemed even more beautiful, as if he were not the same man who had mercilessly taken hundreds of lives during the war. Eileen, meanwhile, was already about to leave when she turned, just as people began shouting that Archduke Cesare was coming this way. The cries stopped her in her tracks. "Coming here?" People shouted for everyone to make way, to step aside. It sounded as though he was directly behind her. And the moment she turned to see what was happening, he was already at her back. The man held out a flower to her, saying she shouldn't be surprised. This was all for her. And so they stood there, in the middle of the massive crowd, which began murmuring in astonishment. It seemed as though the sun itself lit his grace from behind, making him appear even more extraordinary than he already was. It turned out there were knights hidden among the people, deliberately clearing a path. At first, the crowd talked about that, then about her. She caught every word. People whispered, asking who she was, the woman worthy of receiving a lily from him. Watching the parade as well was another lady, standing above them all, observing from a palace balcony. She was an elegant blonde, watching closely as the Archduke approached Eileen. Her role in this story had yet to be played. Meanwhile, after the Archduke approached the girl, Eileen still had to prepare for the ball. Her maid rushed around the room, not knowing where to start. Eileen had to look flawless. As for Eileen herself, she sat with her legs tucked beneath her, not preparing at all. It wasn't that she wanted to go or to stand out in any way. The maid asked whether, at the very least, the girl might want her hair styled. After all, a hairstyle was the second thing people noticed right after the dress. But the girl didn't answer. She was completely lost in her thoughts about what the man had done. More precisely, why he had done it, knowing how much attention it would draw. The girl remembered her mother, who had once told her how happy she was to serve as the Archduke's nanny, to support him, and who had instructed her daughter to support the man as well, to help him in everything. Eileen had listened to every word her mother said, absorbing her advice like a sponge absorbs water. That day, her mother had told her to always wear glasses to hide, as she put it, her daughter's unsightly eyes. And then Eileen decided. She told the maid she didn't want any jewelry at all. The woman nearly flinched. No jewelry? Instead, looking oddly somber, the girl asked the woman simply to help her into the dress. In the castle, ladies whispered about the woman the Archduke had approached in the square. Rumors spread that she would be the new Archduchess, that she was very beautiful and from a noble family. Eileen, who had just arrived, overheard those conversations and grew even more downcast. She didn't consider herself beautiful, nor was she from a noble house. She even doubted whether she should have come at all. It was a pity she couldn't see herself from the outside, because even without jewelry, wearing only a single ball gown, she looked stunning. Still, she came and forced herself to attend for one reason alone. The Archduke had invited her personally. She respected and loved him deeply and felt she had to come. She intended to greet him and leave, but lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice when she collided with another lady. The moment she realized what had happened, she immediately rushed to apologize for her carelessness. It was the very same lady who had earlier watched the parade from the square. She smiled and asked whether the girl before her might be Lady Elrod herself. The girl seemed to recognize her. After all, newspapers had written about His Majesty's engagement to the daughter of Duke Parbolini. She and the pharmacist had also discussed another legend, that the woman had once been engaged to someone else. More precisely, rumor had it that this beauty had originally been engaged to the Archduke himself. But now Ornella von Parbolini was engaged to the current emperor. Now seeing her in person, Eileen was taken by surprise and utterly captivated by her breathtaking beauty. A green-eyed blonde, an absolute beauty. And she was smiling so warmly at her, a simple girl from the common folk. And so they stood facing one another in silence. Only after a few seconds did the girl realize she should probably say something. She was just about to greet her, to ask her something, but she didn't get the chance. She was interrupted. It wasn't the lady herself, but other women who had noticed her and hurried over to talk. The ladies showered her with compliments, saying it was no wonder she was called the Lily of the Trayon Empire, because her beauty was truly extraordinary. Hearing the word Lily, the girl immediately thought of His Grace, of the first time she had met him, when he had called her Lily with a bright smile. Still, the heroine couldn't deny that the nickname Lily suited Lady Ornella far better. She was the radiant, beautiful one, not Eileen. A little later, the ladies finally noticed that another young lady was standing nearby and began asking Ornella who she was. Without the slightest hesitation, she immediately said that this was the very lady whom the Archduke had approached earlier that day in the square. Eileen went pale. She hadn't wanted any attention drawn to her, yet this lady had revealed who she was in front of everyone. The women raised their fans and began whispering about her, remarking that she didn't seem quite as beautiful as the rumors had claimed. But just then, Ornella intervened again, saying that the ladies were mistaken and that such remarks showed disrespect. First and foremost toward the Archduke himself. She said that His Grace was simply a very kind man who helped those in difficult circumstances, and that the young Lady Elrod was merely one of those under his protection. She was clearly upset, insisting that with their words, the women were, above all, speaking nonsense about the Archduke. Ornella even said they ought to apologize for their unacceptable behavior. Eileen, meanwhile, had nothing to say. The ladies, of course, listened and immediately began apologizing, saying they hadn't even considered the matter of patronage. Watching Lady Ornella, the girl couldn't understand her actions. First, she had revealed something she shouldn't have, and then she had seemingly defended her. Fortunately, Eileen was rescued when Sir Rothan came to find her. The man leaned toward her and said he'd been unable to find her for quite some time, and that everyone was already waiting, so she needed to come with him. The girl bowed one last time to the princess and said she hoped they might meet again and talk properly, since it hadn't been possible today. It seemed the ladies behind them had more to comment on, since the Archduke's own knight had personally come for Eileen. Once they were far enough away, the ladies began discussing it. Why would the Archduke's knight come personally for Lady Elrod? They concluded that it certainly wasn't just patronage, since the Archduke could have simply sent a servant to escort her. Making her way through the crowd, the girl felt relieved that she was no longer alone and finally had someone to talk to. Sir Rothan first thanked her simply for coming and politely asked whether the journey there had been easy. Rothan explained that he had been meant to personally escort her, but some matters had come up. The girl said it was perfectly fine since the Archduke himself had taken care of everything. She mentioned that the Archduke had even sent her an assistant to help her get ready. But Eileen had decided that was too much and had politely declined. Now, however, she regretted just a little that she'd refused help with her dress. She admitted that she felt uncomfortable standing out in such a simple outfit, but Sir Rothan didn't get the chance to reply. Diego appeared behind Rothan, nearly shouting that if she had dressed any differently, she would have drawn even more attention. Diego let out a heavy sigh and muttered that it would have been worse if all the men there were paying her too much attention. Meanwhile, the girl asked about Lady Michelle and Sir Signon since she'd hoped to see them. Diego said he wasn't sure those two would even come, and added that if Eileen missed them so much, they should arrange a tea gathering together. Diego went on about some rabbit he'd bought because it reminded him so much of Eileen. She barely had time to think that she was far too old for that before someone behind the knights addressed her. There were several men in uniform who were glad to see her. They chatted briefly before Sir Rothan led her away. By the time they had talked and Rothan escorted her to the right place, it turned out her dance card was already full. She opened it more out of curiosity than anything else, but was slightly surprised. Surprised because the very first line was completely blank, not a single name. Curious. But she was distracted when the knight smiled and said they had arrived, the conservatory. He mentioned that he had recently heard many new plants had been brought into the garden, and that perhaps she might find something interesting for her research. He didn't go in with her, though, saying he needed to return to the ballroom. He averted his gaze and said she could stay there as long as she liked and look around at her leisure, without any rush. Finally, in a rather quiet voice, he added that her way back would be calm and without any trouble. The girl didn't quite understand his words and soon forgot about them, because the conservatory had changed greatly since the last time she'd been there. And yet, every corner still reminded her of countless fond memories. When she had been much younger, just a child, and His Grace had been quite young as well, it was thanks to him that she had spent all her free time here. This conservatory became the place where her soul found rest, where she forgot all the hardships and troubles that weighed on her fragile shoulders. And even though times had changed and those days were now only memories, the atmosphere here remained deeply enchanting, steeped in nostalgia. Suddenly, she heard that she wasn't alone after all, as a voice behind her asked whether this place still brought peace to her heart. As it turned out, she hadn't been alone here for quite some time. That was what Roan had meant. The Archduke greeted Aelin and said that he had been waiting for her. The man smiled at her with the brightest smile he had. The girl hadn't expected anyone else to be here, least of all the Archduke himself, in whose honor the ball was being held. He smiled at her so carefree, as if this were exactly how it was meant to be. As if this was where he belonged, not out there in the crowd celebrating his victory. Eileen was mesmerized by the fact that he had somehow ended up here, unable to understand why. Then it hit her. He had officially greeted her as a guest, and she was still just standing there without saying a single word. Finally, she did what she had come here to do. She bowed to the Archduke and formally congratulated him on his victory and his return home. When the girl lifted her gaze to him, he seemed to smile even brighter, as though her words mattered more to him than congratulations from thousands of others combined. He bowed to her in return and said he sincerely thanked her for the congratulations. She immediately flushed, adjusted her glasses, and admitted that she had been nervous while greeting him, since she wasn't used to such formality and hoped she'd done everything correctly. Instead, the man only praised her, and then reached for the slip of paper she was still holding in her palm, saying that what mattered more now was the dance she owed him. It felt as though the girl's heart nearly burst from her chest at his touch. And it began to race even harder when the man started signing something on the paper, looking absolutely incredible as he did so. After writing something, he handed the slip back to its owner. Curious about what he'd done, the girl immediately leaned in to see what was written as soon as the paper was back in her hands. As it turned out, he had written his own name on the very first line. The girl froze when she saw it, and the Archduke felt the need to ask if she was all right. She replied that she simply couldn't believe he had invited her to dance. She felt awkward since she couldn't really dance and wasn't very good at it. She'd never had a proper teacher. But the man was determined to put an end to her worries and quickly interrupted her. Smiling and gesturing toward himself, he asked a rhetorical question about who had given her her very first dance lessons. Then the girl remembered. Her first teacher had been him. Back then, she had even deliberately stepped on her own feet just to check whether it was all a dream. But it hadn't been a dream. It had been an incredible experience. Childhood memories she carried deep in her heart. And most likely, he had never forgotten either. How he had taught her to dance, and how Eileen had lit up whenever he said they were going to the conservatory to dance. She had given it her all, ready to dance for hours as long as her partner was still him. So gentle and kind to her. However, when her mother found out about those dances, she hadn't approved, believing the girl was wasting the Archduke's time on foolishness. She beat and screamed at the girl, saying that Eileen must never forget her place, that in her mother's eyes she wasn't worth a single minute of his time. So now, when he offered again, she remembered how her mother had taught her where she belonged. And truly, someone like her had no right to this. The man noticed the change in her expression, gently touched her cheek, and asked what was troubling her. She pulled her face away from his hand and said she wasn't thinking about anything, adding that the Archduke ought to consider returning to the ball. After all, everyone was surely waiting for him, and she was here taking up his precious time. The man said that yes, time was valuable, but why shouldn't he spend a little of it walking through the conservatory? New flowers had been brought in, and he was curious to see them. Besides, the girl herself hadn't been here in a long time. He wanted them, as in the past, to simply stroll through these familiar paths together. The girl folded her hands and nodded, though for some reason she concluded that he wasn't truly interested in the plants at all. As they walked, Eileen remembered the lily he had given her and thanked him for it. She also apologized for not dressing properly, explaining that she had thought she was only coming to offer her congratulations, only to find things turned out quite differently. She said that in an outfit like this, it would be better not to dance. But if only she had known. Their conversation was interrupted by a flowering shrub. She hurried over to the plant, having seen it in illustrations in a book. The flower was known for its powerful healing properties. She explained that there was even a legend about it, that the flower resembled a severed head, and although it could stop bleeding, it was considered a bad omen. The man asked whether she truly liked flowers that dropped their own heads, since according to the legend, they were rather eerie. The girl replied that she found them interesting mainly because of their unique medicinal properties. When the Archduke suddenly grabbed the flowers and began tearing them, the girl was genuinely frightened. She called out to his grace, asking what on earth he was doing and why. She lightly touched his hand and told him he should stop because the plant was quite delicate. Only then did the man let go of the plant, and the girl let out a breath of relief. She didn't understand at all why he had suddenly started tearing at them, but the Archduke immediately apologized. He explained that lately he hadn't been feeling like himself. The girl asked whether something was troubling him, but he waved it off, saying there was probably nothing of the sort. He said that perhaps it had affected him that the girl had nearly been caught, and nearly lost her life. But even so, the girl thought, he hadn't been this impulsive before, especially not back in the incident with Kalpin. She couldn't understand what might have happened during those 3 years, but he didn't give her time to dwell on it, saying that the wedding would take place in a month, though he would have preferred it sooner. She wanted to talk about it and said there had to be some other way. She said that the Archduke already treated her very well, but marriage wasn't the only way to avoid a trial against her. The man suddenly noticed that they weren't alone, so he pulled Eileen into an embrace without paying attention to the meaning of her words. It wasn't just an embrace. By doing so, he shielded Eileen from the assassins who had come for him. And when he saw the entire group of thugs, he didn't panic. He merely smiled. He only asked the girl to close her eyes for a few minutes and not look at what was about to happen. As for the knights, at that moment they were all, by the Archduke's order, at the ball rather than near the conservatory. More precisely, 2 of them were there, while 1 was not. When that person arrived, she immediately asked where Lady Eileen was. It was a woman, Michelle, Knight of Tesserae. She looked worried that she hadn't managed to sign up for a dance with Eileen. Diego merely laughed at her and said no one was going to wait for her and that everything was already over, of course. She called him an idiot, after which Rothan asked where Senon was, the person she was supposed to arrive with. She explained that he was unlikely to be free today, and that was where the conversation ended because something happened. Michelle, who had just arrived, was stunned by the horrifying scene before her eyes. At first, the guests didn't understand anything when the doors burst open and 2 figures stood there, but they immediately felt the tension. Then they heard the Archduke's voice, saying that he was ready to accept this as gifts for his victory. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. He was addressing everyone, because he knew there was a traitor among them. He said that their foolish methods hadn't changed at all. He claimed to appreciate the kindness of those who had attacked him and promised he would repay it, tenfold. He looked truly menacing when he said he would eagerly await the moment to return the favor. After those events, Eileen somehow remembered a pleasant day from her childhood. They had been in the garden, drinking tea with sweets. The little girl was talking about a book the Archduke had given her and was just about to take a sip of tea. But she didn't get the chance because the Archduke's hand covered the cup and he asked her to stop for a moment. Taking it into his own hands, the guy slid it all the way to the edge of the table. Since an attendant was standing nearby, the Tesserae told him to take the dish. The man didn't take the cup. Instead, he began screaming like he was being slaughtered, begging not to be killed. Scenes of people fighting for their lives didn't interest the Archduke, but he reminded him that he had asked him to drink that beverage. He hadn't, however, told him to drop to his knees and beg for forgiveness. Since the servant wouldn't do it voluntarily, knowing it would cost him his life, a knight helped him along. Only a few minutes passed before blood began to pour from the servant's mouth and the cup flew to the ground, shattering. Cesare regretted only the cup. It was a fine set, and because of such a fool, there was now 1 less piece. He turned back to the girl with a smile, intending to say that tea time was over for today, but the sweets were still waiting. However, he quickly stopped short because Eileen had clearly been badly frightened. She was crying uncontrollably, because the scene that hadn't stirred a single drop of pity in the Archduke struck her straight in the heart. He didn't know what to do. He felt helpless when she suddenly screamed that she was terribly, terribly scared. Now the girl, already grown but no less sensitive, lay on her couch at home, thinking about what had happened long ago, and what had happened just recently. She wasn't crying, but the events at the ball had left a heavy mark on her heart. The way he had mercilessly killed everyone who had threatened his life, it was terrifying and shocking. She fully understood his reaction, both then and now. They had been the first to come for his life. They deserved it. She knew it was nothing more than self-defense with brutal methods, because those were the times they lived in. It must be morally exhausting to live knowing people are always trying to kill you. What saddened her most was that she couldn't help or protect him in any way. When the girl sat up, she placed a small box on her lap that had been lying on the table. Inside was a watch she had planned to give the Archduke. But he never gave her the chance. No sooner had he returned than he began proposing marriage, and then came the ball. In short, everything after his return happened so quickly that she still hadn't managed to give it to him. It was supposed to be a gift in honor of his victory. Suddenly, she was distracted. Someone knocked at the door, even though she wasn't expecting anyone today. Without suspicion, the girl stepped outside to see who had come and why. There stood a man she had never seen and didn't know, but she assumed he was there for her father and said he wasn't home. The stranger said nothing about her father. He only asked her name and upon hearing it, gave a chilling smile, more like a snarl. He grabbed her hair, pulling it away from her face and staring straight into her eyes, said that the Baron hadn't lied. They truly were beautiful. Eileen didn't even have time to ask who he was or what was going on, before the man explained that Baron Elrod had agreed to sell him certain goods and had taken an advance payment. But no matter how long the man waited, his goods never arrived. Terrified, Eileen asked what exactly her father had sold him. The man replied that the only thing Elo Elrod had left was sold to him, his daughter. And so it turned out that Eileen was now considered his future bride. It seemed to shake the girl to her very core. Could it really be that her father had sold his only daughter to some man? The man assumed she probably hadn't known about it, so he gave her 3 days to prepare. He warned her that it would be best for her to say goodbye to everyone here right away. He also showed her a letter, a contract her father had signed. Later, the girl went back inside the house. The words kept echoing in her head that she would have to leave the country forever with a new husband. More importantly, memories flashed through her mind of how insistently the Archduke had pushed for their marriage. Back then, he had warned her that she would either lose her head or be sold off in marriage to some filthy pig. He had named those two exact outcomes that awaited her, because he must have known everything long ago. That was why the girl immediately set out for the palace. She was greeted warmly there. The butler, Sonyo, said he had been waiting for her for quite some time, and that it was painful not seeing Eileen. The girl admitted that she really had been busy lately and apologized for not visiting. The man waved it off, saying he hadn't meant to make her feel guilty. She wanted to ask whether the Archduke was free today, but she didn't get the chance. The butler quickly explained that it would be difficult to see him today and apologized to Eileen for the trouble she'd taken to come all this way. Of course, the girl noted that he looked worried. Surely the Archduke had given him some task. Sonyo said he could bring her a cake he'd bought today at a new shop so she wouldn't be upset. The girl agreed and thanked him. While waiting for Sonyo, she walked over to the window, scolding herself for coming under the influence of her emotions. An impulsive decision. She had forgotten that the Archduke wasn't someone you could just see on a whim. Could it be that after she refused to marry him, he'd lost interest in her? She hadn't been stubborn out of pride or anything like that. She simply hadn't understood the full situation. To the Archduke, though, it might have looked foolish. And what would happen to her now? If her father had sold her, would she really be forced into marriage against her will? What hurt most was the thought that if she left, she would never see him again. As for the Archduke, he suddenly appeared right in front of her and asked what had happened. He likely hadn't expected to see her here either. There had to be a reason for her visit. Seeing him, the girl smiled gently in a special way, almost as if she were saying goodbye. She said she had come because she had a small gift for him. Her hands were shaking as she held out the box. She said it was nothing special, but she hadn't been able to give it to him at the ball, so... She finished by saying she simply wanted to do something nice, just as he opened the box and saw the watch. She added that even though it was late and meant to celebrate his victory, she still couldn't not give it to him. She even said that if it didn't suit him or he didn't like it, he should tell her. But he did like it. Smiling, he pressed the gift to his chest. And that smile of his? It felt like it struck her straight in the heart. It brought tears to her eyes. She had been holding her emotions in for far too long, and now she couldn't anymore. She immediately felt embarrassed for breaking down like this and started apologizing. The man didn't understand why she was apologizing, but she kept apologizing because she was crying. He didn't ask anything, since she was trying to explain what had happened herself, though the tears kept choking her words. The Archduke gently touched her cheek and said he couldn't even be angry when she cried like this. He admitted that at first he had planned to be stricter with her. Calming down a little, she asked why he'd been angry with her. He explained that she hadn't even made her social debut yet, and her father was already planning to sell her off. And on top of that, she had refused to marry the Archduke. How could he not be angry when all he wanted was to protect her? Eileen quietly apologized. After a few minutes of silence, the man asked whether she intended to marry that other man. Thankfully, Eileen shook her head. She didn't. Then he gently asked what they should do to pull her out of that man's grasp. She didn't know. She didn't know what to say or what decision to make. The man lightly squeezed her hand and said that she did know. She knew that his offer was still standing, so he repeated it, asking her to marry him. He leaned closer to her lips and asked if she still refused. The question that had been stuck in her mind all day was why he hadn't said it from the very beginning. And this she wouldn't ask him, because she had to find the answer herself, even though Cesare had known it for a long time. The decision about her had already been made. It felt as if invisible threads had seized her entire body and she couldn't even take a step. She felt as if she were a step away from the noose, and the only one who could save her was the Archduke. After thinking it over, the girl said she agreed. Finally, she made the definitive decision to marry the Archduke, despite all the convictions her mother had instilled in her. He smiled. That was exactly what he had been aiming for. The girl looked away and asked instead that he open the laboratory, since once she became the Archduchess, she would only be a burden to him. She promised only to finish the medicine without using those compounds. The man didn't answer. He just kissed her on the lips. She hadn't expected it and asked him to wait a moment. But of course, he ignored her words and kissed her again. The girl blushed and got flustered when he pressed her to him at the waist. When he broke the kiss, he smiled and said he'd open the laboratory once they were married. Since she wanted to meet her father, Cesare decided to escort her, explaining that now she was his wife. So from now on, they went everywhere together. Eileen squeezed his hand and said that the wedding hadn't even happened yet. She also didn't like the way she was dressed. Everyone was staring at her. The man thought glasses would have drawn even more attention. She blushed and lowered her head, but he turned her back, telling her to walk confidently. The girl said she couldn't, since she wasn't used to being without her glasses. Cesare said that with her head down, she'd bump into something. And then he unceremoniously hugged her, causing her blush to deepen even more. The girl pushed him away and said that he couldn't just go around showing off and drawing attention like that. A little later, the man led her to where she needed to go, and the girl could hardly believe that he could really be in such a place. A place filled with dancers. With the hum of conversation, singing, and drunk men all around, the atmosphere was completely different. Not at all like the gaming house. She shuddered at the sight, and she recognized a woman there. A woman who had once come to Eileen for medicine. At that time, she had asked for a medicine that helped people die without pain. She requested it so she wouldn't fear death later. Now this woman, Marlena, had incredible beauty and 1,000 admiring gazes directed at her. Everyone around was shouting her name and marveling at Marlena. But suddenly, she locked her gaze on someone in particular, someone she recognized. There was the doctor she had come to, and a tall, handsome man beside her. And the man's hand rested on the doctor's hip. Eileen blushed and covered herself with her hat, assuming the beauty had recognized her. And surely she had, because her expression changed. Later, the girl began singing a song about men you shouldn't trust. The song was silly in its lyrics, just saying men are bad and you can't trust them. Even the Archduke laughed, saying the song was funny. He asked Eileen if she knew Marlena, but she immediately said it was the first time she had seen her. She finally asked just to find her father and leave as soon as possible. And Marlena watched them, frowning when the doctor began to leave. Since Eileen asked to go to her father, the man led her to the large doors. Before entering, he made sure that she really wanted this. The girl was convinced she had to see what her father had been doing all this time. Not that she looked fully determined, she just knew she had to know. Most of all, she wanted to know the reason her father had sold her. The Archduke had no right to object. If she wanted this, he had no right to stop her. They entered the darkest place, both literally and figuratively, that could exist in the establishment. And there was her drunk father. The man watched as the expression on the girl's face shifted to one of fear. He even asked if she was surprised, though her face said it all. She asked His Grace if that really was her father. To calm her a bit, so she wouldn't see the horror that was almost unbelievable, he covered her eyes. He could feel that she was about to cry, so he soothed her with gentle words. Her mother immediately came to mind. Her mother had asked if the daughter had noticed her father's behavior. The woman rolled her eyes. Her husband had annoyed her all these years. She had told her sleepy little daughter that her father always smelled of other women's perfumes. But he wouldn't even come to bed with his own wife. The mother stroked the girl's back, saying that she only had her daughter. Eileen heard her mother repeating that she only had her. Since she had frozen in shock, Cesare himself began to bring her back to her senses, calling to her. The girl said she was fine, and the man hugged her from behind. The girl couldn't hold back, she cried, and the Archduke soothed her, whispering calming words into her ear. Tears from Eileen had a price to pay, so her father went flying to the floor. The Archduke Cesare said he was disgusting. After selling his daughter, now he was just enjoying himself in such places. The man asked what His Grace was even doing here, in a place like this. Cesare finally said he should live in peace. Lately, the Archduke had been quite impulsive, and if he crossed his path again, nothing good would come of it. He even threatened that he could take his head. But this time, for Eileen's sake, he would give one last chance. Leaving the final word to himself, the man carried Eileen out of that place. Once they arrived, the Archduke set her on a chair and knelt before her. He began to calm her, telling her she could now relax and open her eyes. There was nothing to be afraid of. She just grabbed his hand and clutched his sleeve. Cesare was concerned about her emotional state as she looked completely bewildered. But he decided not to be angry and continued to soothe his beloved. He embraced the girl and said that now, with him, she was safe. He wouldn't let anyone harm her. Thank you for watching until the end. Manga is not just stories, it's emotions we experience together. Subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your words make this channel alive. Every message helps us build a small community where we share the feelings and struggles of the characters.